Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender live action adaptation is going to have a number of changes from the original animated show. We already know they're removing the quote sexist elements from Sokka, as well as, I guess, gender problems from Katara. But they are also going to be changing the character of Aang, the Avatar. Before we get into this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. Let's get into this over here. Albert Kim did this massive interview. If you don't know who Albert Kim is, he is the showrunner for Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live action adaptation for Netflix. But he did this massive interview with IGN, and he spoke about how he is changing the live action show from the animated show. And he's specifically adding in a number of new scenes. But he also, this is how he described the show. He said, I've used the term that this is a remix, not a cover, and that you've got to hit a lot of familiar notes, but you can't forget that this is supposed to be a new song. No, it's not supposed to be a new song. It is supposed to be the same song in live action rather than in animation. I don't understand why these people in Hollywood don't understand this. They're of the opinion that they are creating something new when indeed they are not. They are creating a live action adaptation. They're creating adaptations of something that already exists, and they should stay faithful to the thing that they are indeed adapting. There's a reason why they are adapting it, and it's probably because it is very popular and highly successful. That is usually the case, especially nowadays, right? So it's not supposed to be a new song. It is supposed to be a cover, and you wanted to have a cover that is as good or better than the original, right? You don't want to be creating something new when when people are expecting a cover. So you're wrong. You're approaching this from the wrong point of view, and that is a huge, huge red flag. He went on and said, so obviously there are story points and characters that you have to do fairly faithfully from the original, but at the same time, you're literally translating something from 2D to 3D, and that meant dimensionalizing the story, taking it into new places, filling in some of the gaps. What gaps? I feel like the anime show did a really good job of not really having a lot of those gaps, and you don't really need to take it to new places. I don't think there's any need to do that. And then this whole idea of like dimensionalizing the story because you need to take it to 2D to 3D. That just sounds like an excuse, or he's just trying to justify his own changes. It doesn't really make any sense to me. He went on to detail a number of the scenes that he and his team have added. He says there are certain scenes that you never saw in the original, whether it's the attack on the Southern Air Temple or the Agni Kai between Ozai and Zuko. And those are things that I knew we needed to see in order to make it feel much more grounded as a live action show. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Those things were obviously referenced. We knew they happened. So I don't think there's any an issue with showing the attack on the Southern Air Temple. We obviously see the destruction of that, I believe, later on when Aang gets there during the show. But I think the Agni Kai between Ozai and Zuko, I don't know if we really need to say that because you want to see Zuko act as a villain. I saw someone commenting on this on the IGN article. They're like, well, you're robbing Zuko of his story. You want to see him as the villain. He should be shown as the villain, and then he gets to have that character growth where he realizes what he was doing is wrong. He repents, he seeks forgiveness, and then obviously joins the Avatar's team. So I think that it probably is a huge mistake because you are changing the audience's perception of the character. And I think you're also kind of, you don't want to show Zuko as sympathetic from the very get go. So then this next point, so it was about feeling your way throughout the process. Where can we take the story into the new directions that still feels true to the spirit of the original? And that's what it all comes down to, making sure it feels like it was Avatar in spirit. So he would also go on to talk about how they're moving forward Azula's story from season 2 into the first season of the live action. He says, yeah, so Azula is one who in the animated series you don't really see until season 2. Fire Lord Ozai is also one who does not appear very much in season 1, but we made the conscious decision to bring some of those Fire Nation storylines more to the fore in the first season because I felt like we needed to balance out the storylines. We needed to know more about the background for Zuko and why he's doing what he's doing. and set that in the context of his family dynamic and how he fits in with his father and sister. Again, I think this is something they don't need to do. I think like having it happen as it did in the animated series is probably for the best because you do see him as the villain and he is the main antagonist in much of the first season. So I disagree with this idea. Again, this is part of that whole like he's creating a new song rather than sticking with the old song. But nevertheless, he goes on and says, and that's something they get to later in the series. Yes, they do, of the animated series, but we had a little bit of a benefit of hindsight. We knew where that was going, so we could pull some of those elements up front into the first season and make the first season a little bit richer and a little deeper in terms of character storylines. But you're also robbing from the second season storylines. So just because you're moving it forward doesn't mean it's going to be richer later on because you're robbing it. So you're kind of kneecapping yourself, which isn't very smart. But we already know that the guy's entire thinking about it, where he's trying to create a new song, isn't very smart. So he would then reiterate this. We wanted to make sure that Zuko felt like a much more dimensionalized character, and that meant bringing in more elements of his family storyline. So that naturally meant feeling like we should see a little more Azula and a little more Ozai. If anything, Azula's story in the first season is a little bit of a prequel to her story in the second and third seasons, but that's another element that we thought we should see rather than just talk about. Later in the interview, he did admit that a lot of the reasons why they're bringing the Fire Nation story forward is to save on costs. He said this. I'll say that logistically speaking, that is also another reason we decided to do a little more of a Fire Nation story in the first episode because it gave us kind of some regular sets and environments that we could go back to in every episode because our heroes are traveling from location to location every episode, but we can always go back to the Fire Nation throne room for a scene or two in each episode. And it gave us a little bit more stability in the storytelling. So that was another reason for bringing them more into the fore in the first season. So it sounds like they might be doing some flashbacks and stuff like that too, sprinkled throughout. Um, I don't see this working very well. I think the way they did it in the animated show was done very well. People really liked it. That's why you're making the show in the first place, and you probably should have stuck to that instead of thinking you could improve upon it. And then we got this part here. It talks about the show's tone. He says, I think that's the essential tightrope that we had to walk, is figuring out tonally where the show lived because you wanted to stay true to the original, which had a large component of humor, lots of action, lots of darkness too. This show, even as a Nickelodeon show, went pretty far in terms of mature themes and scenes, things that you didn't see before. I mean, I think Ko, the face stealer, initiated nightmares in an entire generation of kids. That's not something you normally see on a Nickelodeon show. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That sounds accurate to the show there. But he goes on and says, and especially as the series went on, seasons 2 and 3 are a lot more mature in theme than, say, season 1 was. So for us, it was about striking that right balance of making sure you were true to the DNA of the original. But at the same time, we had to make it a serialized Netflix drama, which meant it couldn't just be for kids. So what? He just stated how the show had a mix of humor and mature themes and dark themes. It was giving people nightmares. Like adults were probably watching it with their children as well. Adults could watch it. But he's saying that they had to change it because it's a serialized Netflix drama and it couldn't just be for kids. And this is the big kicker right here. It had to also appeal to the people who are big fans of Game of Thrones. Where have we heard this before? We heard this with Rings of Power. What happened to that? Utter, absolute disaster, complete catastrophe. 63% of people who tuned in to watch the first episode did not complete the series because you're chasing something that is not the core of your product. Lord of the Rings is not Game of Thrones. Avatar, The Last Airbender is not Game of Thrones. Different people watch different things. Sure, there might be some overlap, but they are also different properties, and you want to stick to what made those properties successful. And now you're trying to say you want to bring in some kind of Game of Thrones vibe to it into Avatar: The Last Airbender. No, stop it. He goes on and justifies it and says, and so it had to feel grounded and mature and adult in that way too. So that's, like I said, the tightrope that we have to walk. Again, doesn't really make any sense because he's contradicting himself. Because again, he said up here that some of these characters and scenes were giving nightmares to an entire generation of kids. It had mature themes and scenes, but he has to change it because he's chasing some Game of Thrones audience. Just utterly ridiculous. The Game of Thrones audience also hated what happened at the end of Game of Thrones too. Just like, just to be clear. All right, this is the real kicker. They're changing Aang's character. And he says this here. So we decided to make Aang's narrative drive a little clearer. In the first season of the animated series, he's kind of going from place to place looking for adventures. He even says, first, we've got to go and ride the elephant koi. It's a little looser as befits a cartoon. We needed to make sure that he had that drive from the start. So he justifies the change, saying, and so that's a change that we made. We essentially give him this vision of what's going to happen. And he says, I have to get to the Northern Water Tribe to stop this from happening. That gives him much more narrative compulsion going forward, as opposed to let's make a detour and go ride the elephant koi, that type of thing. So that's something, again, that's part of the process of going from a Nickelodeon cartoon to a Netflix serialized drama. I think this is a huge mistake. I do not think that Aang should have this drive right away. I think he should still kind of be the goofy kid who's really unaware of what's going on. I don't think he doesn't know about the air tribe being destroyed. He's wanting to just explore the world. He is supposed to be this 12-year-old kid. I think kind of giving this burden to him already is something that he's supposed to gradually grow into, and he struggles with, and he resists a lot. And I think having him have this drive that he already has the burden, he has this responsibility, I think is a mistake, because it, I think, takes away from a lot of the character growth that he has, where he has to realize that it is his responsibility to defeat the Fire Nation, unlearn all of the bending techniques that he has to do in order to defeat him. So huge mistake here. Um, you're completely kind of undermining all of Aang's journey, right? You're taking away that character growth that he experiences, that story that we follow him on, that kind of naivety that he has. You're taking that away, and you're kind of giving him this burden. And I think that just really takes away from the character of Aang. And don't get me wrong, I like characters that have heavy is the head that wears the crown. I think that's Aquaman. That's what Aquaman should be, and that's why I criticize the Jason Momoa description of Aquaman. But in this case, that Aang isn't Aquaman. Aang is Aang, and he does have this naivety. He is this 12-year-old boy. He's wanting to explore the world. He doesn't really know what's happening. He doesn't know the politics of the world because he's been frozen in a giant ice cube for I don't even remember how many years. And so they're really this is a huge change, and I think alters a lot of the entire story. And I think this is going to be a massive problem that the show is going to have. Interestingly enough, earlier in the interview, he actually was talking about trying to maintain Aang's goofball nature. And he said, Aang is just a kid. He's a goofy 12-year-old kid, and he's having fun, and he's a big old goofball. And we wanted to make sure that we showed that because that's as important to the story as all the action and the epic fantasy of it all. Again, I'm not really sure how you can kind of show, like, already we're seeing this. He looks very serious here in this shot. He's clearly probably just come out of the ice cube. And the idea that he's going to still be this goofy 12-year-old kid, but have this burden, this drive that he has to accomplish, I don't think you can do that. I just don't think those two things are compatible. Maybe they'll prove me wrong, but huge red flag, I think, that Albert Kim said in this IGN article. I don't think that this article in IGN, this interview that he did, is going to get people interested in the show. I think it turns people away from the show because you're admitting how much you have changed of it. And I think at this point in time, people are just tired of these new creatives coming in, thinking that they can do something better than the original creators, and and putting their own spin on things. And we see this time and time again that they fail abysmally. You can point to Rings of Power. You can point to Cowboy Bebop. I mean, you can point to Zack Snyder's DCEU. You can point to the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well. They've abandoned the comic books, their source material. They think that they can do things better, and it has turned into an utter disaster, with even directors like Matthew Vaughn describing it as dead. And that looks like what's going to happen with Avatar: The Last Airbender. in this live action show. But those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys make of what Albert Kim had to say. What are your expectations for Avatar: The Last Airbender? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, but to always speak the truth.